Welcome to the 10th edition of Atlantic Council Front Page, our premier live ideas platform for global leaders. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. We've heard from extraordinary leaders on this platform already, including the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani, Colombian President Ivan Duque, and the IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva. Earlier this week, as part of our deepening work with the European Union, we heard the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Annegret Vestager. Alongside our many other virtual convenings, the Atlantic Council Front Page has allowed the Atlantic Council community to grow closer and larger during this period of coronavirus as we build a global conversation about the most significant matters of common concern. It's in that spirit that I am delighted to open this edition of AC Front Page, featuring Her Excellency Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, Federal Minister of Defense of Germany. Herzlich willkommen, Frau Bundesminister, for this conversation on transatlantic resilience, among other matters. The NATO Secretary General on this platform announced the launch of NATO 2030, a reflection and his effort to deepen the political and global dimension of the world's most enduring alliance. We now look forward to hear from you about how you see the future security picture for Germany, Europe, and the alliance at this historic moment when great power rivalry is again with us, and Germany and Europe are looking to find their place and sketch their strategy. In that context, we also look forward to your reflections on President Trump's recent confirmation of plans to withdraw 9,500 U.S. troops from Germany, reducing those that will remain from 34,500 to 25,000. In the Wall Street Journal this week, National Security Advisor Robert C. O'Brien said the Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs are diligently preparing a plan to bring to the President using the ideas that our troops have to be more forward and expeditionary. And Pentagon officials have told me that the plan could be in the President's hands as early as this week. Some speak of the need for greater European strategic autonomy. Some worry about the danger of strategic decoupling across the Atlantic. What's clear is that the world is changing, and we are navigating what we at the Atlantic Council have been calling an inflection point in history, perhaps as significant as the periods after World Wars I and II. We at the Atlantic Council are responding by doubling down on our mission of shaping the global future together with allies and friends to advance a more democratic, prosperous, equal, just, and collaborative international order. In that context, I'm delighted to welcome Minister Kramp-Karrenbauer to the Atlantic Council for a conversation unpacking the transatlantic resilience. The minister has served as German Defense Minister since July 2019 and as chairperson of the Christian Democratic Union since December of 2018. She previously served as Secretary General of the CDU in 2018 and as Minister President of Saarland from 2011 to 2018. The minister has warned of an aggressive Russia, the threat of Islamist terrorism, an ascendant China with global ambitions, and authoritarian challenges to a liberal world order ever since she took up her current role as defense minister. She has spoken clearly about the greater responsibility that Germany and Europe have to must shoulder as part of an Atlantic alliance in addressing these challenges. At the Council, we want to make sure that we remain focused on the threats and challenges we face together, and that we work through any of these issues with our allies, NATO, and particularly as well with the EU. Germany is a key NATO ally and has backed a robust economic recovery package to help Europe move out of the current economic crisis within the EU, something few of us would have expected even 3 months ago. So thank you for joining us today, Madam Minister, to unpack these subjects and more. With that, I want to tell our audience that they can tweet about this event and send questions using the hashtag #ACFrontPage. You can also send questions in on the Q&A portion of Zoom. And now it's a pleasure to pass to my colleague, Anna Wieslander, the director of our North Europe office in Stockholm, which opened in the fall of 2016 and serves as an important and consistent extension of the Council into the region. Anna is an expert in defense and security, one of the best anywhere, analyzing international trends with a special focus on the security situation in the region and how it relates to transatlantic and global geopolitical developments. We know, Madam Minister, that you might have preferred going up to Sweden during this period of time when it's always so beautiful, but we are where we are with coronavirus, and we're delighted to have you here with us in this virtual setting and this global audience. And I pass the floor to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Fred. And dear Madam Minister, Kramp-Karrenbauer, dear audience, I'm delighted for this opportunity to have this conversation with you in Berlin, Madam Minister, me in Stockholm, and the dear colleagues in Washington, D.C., and a great audience across the Atlantic. You were supposed to come to Stockholm, as Fred just mentioned, as part of a visit around to northern countries, but I was delighted to learn that in spite of not being able to do this, you have met on video conference the Nordics and the German defense ministers and discussed the situation up here. So we will get back also to your view on the northern dimension, but I would like to start with the state of the transatlantic alliance, actually. And last year, we had NATO celebrating 70 years. Its first Secretary General, Lord Ismay, he said once that the goal of the alliance was to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. And presently, I think there is a lot of discussion on what would be an appropriate formula and the purpose of NATO today. So let us talk about each of these components. That's my proposal, starting with keeping the Americans in. As we heard here in the introduction, there are many of us who are astonished and worried about the US announcement of a major troop withdrawal from Germany. And there are many other worrying signs in the transatlantic relationship. We also have seen a lack of American global leadership during the COVID-19 crisis that adds on to this, these concerns. So I would like to ask you, what is your reaction to the US troop withdrawal from Germany?
Ja, sehr geehrte
Ms. Wieslander, a warm welcome from me to all those who are participating in this webinar. I'm looking forward to the discussion. You mentioned 70 years of NATO. NATO for us in Germany and for myself is an alliance of the US with European and other states, and states that have common interests, but more importantly, that share values. NATO is not a trade organization. Security is not a commodity, but it is about how we all together deal with the threats of our time. The US troops and civilian staff that are stationed in Germany are personnel that, of course, stand up for the security of Germany together with our own troops and our NATO partners. But they are also here because of collective defense. They send a very, very strong signal from Europe to Russia, for example, and they also serve, and that is a very important purpose, they also serve a US security. Because if you look at the locations, for example, Ramstein is the hub of a deployment of troops, further deployment to operations, or Landstuhl, there's a military hospital, or Grafenwehr, where a lot of exercise is done, and all that serves the security of the US too. And I believe that over decades, the US has been able to trust that NATO partners are actually very faithful partners. May I remind you that we've only evoked our mutual defense clause once after 9/11, when all of us deployed to Afghanistan by the side of our US friends, and we've all lost some men and women there. Let's not forget that.
Thank you. I wonder if you can comment on, there are rumors that these troops, or there are US indications that these troops will be moved elsewhere in Europe or other places, rumors on Poland, for instance. What would that mean for European security?
It is important to stress that we are not talking about a bilateral German-American matter, but we are indeed talking about redeployment of troops within an alliance. And there are different options. If troops are redeployed to the US, then you have to make sure that you don't send the signal, which would be incorrect, that that the US is less interested in Europe. If troops are then moved to the Indo-Pacific area, then that would mean a new strategic focus of the US. And if troops are moved within Europe to Poland, for example, then it is important that we remember the NATO-Russia Founding Act from 1997. It is an important document, especially in a time where Russia is becoming more assertive. It is important that NATO and the NATO partners stand united, visibly united, and it is important that we stick to this treaty that we've agreed to.
Thank you. And in the broader context, what does this mean, or what can we expect from cooperation with the US ahead, sort of, when we've had these kind of developments recently?
I was very happy last week when, in the format of the NATO defense ministers, we got together for NATO defense ministerial, and my colleague and friend Mark Esper said very clearly last week that for the US, the strong link and the strong focus on the transatlantic bond and on the connection to Europe needs to be maintained, and that this is not a subject matter that can be discussed. And this is a very important point for us. We deployed to many common missions, for example, to Afghanistan. On deployment, we stand up for the peace process. For many years, we've been fighting there together. We made sacrifices. The US has lost lives, of course, as well. And so the objective we always had, which was to prevent Afghanistan from being a safe haven for terrorists, is something that we want to secure for the long term. And it is important here that we can rely on one another here, that we coordinate our plans with one another. And so it's not only about an individual decision that is going to be made, but instead it's about how we deal with each other, how we behave to one another, what our goals are, how many allies are to be involved, and it's important that the Pentagon and the American side is reliable.
Thank you. So reliability, predictability.
Also Vorhersagbarkeit.
Moving on then, regarding the aim to keep the Germans down, that's part of history. I think on the contrary, many are asking for even more German leadership now on security, on defense. We also have the issue of the German defense spending, which is rising, but Americans then thinking this pace, the target of reaching 2% in 2031, that is too slow for them. We have France calling for President Macron. Germany should take more risks, and we should have more European independence. I've heard you agreeing on the risk-taking. You also believe that it's time to be more of that, but that you rather would like to see a stronger European pillar in NATO. You have put forward this in Financial Times recently, for instance. And I think that is something that appeals to many European countries, building a stronger European part of NATO, and that Germany could be a unifier and perhaps move forward on this. So in your view, what does a European pillar in NATO, what does it look like a bit? You know, what can Germany take a lead on when it comes to developing such a thing?
Well, yeah, you just outlined NATO's history, and back in the day, the goal was, after the Second World War, to keep Germany under control, or, as Baron Ismay said, to keep the Germans down. But today, it is indeed a fact that we're an important and reliable partner as a country, and that many expectations are being placed in us. And I would like to say very clearly now that if we talk about a higher defense budget and about building up capabilities, then this is in our very own German security interest. This has nothing to do with any administration around the globe or demands coming from there. It's our very own German security interest. In the time after the reunification, I think we believed for far too long that we can invest little in defense, especially since 2014 with the illegal annexation of Crimea, with what happened in eastern Ukraine. We all in NATO felt how vivid and how urgent the threat is that emanates from Russia. And since then, we together committed, for example, in Wales, to invest more in collective and national defense in the alliance. But now, looking at the figures of a share of a GDP is maybe the wrong number to look at, because if we were to hit another recession, we would get to 2% much quicker, but not have built up the capabilities that we actually need. What we do need is this. What Germany pledged in Wales, which was investing so much over the next few years that by 2030 we can provide 10% of military capabilities in NATO. That is the goal we pursue, and this is what we fight for, what we have fought for in the last few years. That's what I'm advocating for also here in Germany, my home country, and this will be a major challenge, also with a view keeping in mind the budgetary constraints of the public administration after COVID-19. So we must make sure, if you look at Europe as a whole, at all European member states, that overall we have to spend as much on the military as China does, for example, but with less effective input, because we, as partners and neighbors, very often do things for ourselves, and then we realize that parallel structures in our neighbor countries are doing the same. So the challenge here is in Europe that we need to coordinate better what we do with regards to equipment, to armament. We have to develop a common strategic compass, looking at where are our threats, how do we deal with those threats. There are very different threat perceptions on the continent, and so we have to make clear in our commitment in Africa, for example, right now in the Sahel region, that this is an interest that is a purely European interest. The terrorism originating from there is mostly a threat for the European countries, and we cannot rely on the fact that this is to be perceived as a special task for the US side. No, this is our responsibility, and we need to be more able to act and better than we were in the past.
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned the risk of decreasing spending on defense due to the economic recession caused by the COVID-19 crisis. How worried are you about that? And in combination, then, Germany is entering the EU presidency. Can you combine this so that we get this efficiency that we are talking about all the time in the most possible output of the money that we are spending on defense now, when it's so strained, the resources?
Well, I believe it's a good situation at the moment, where, as we take over the EU Council presidency in a few days, together, Chancellor Merkel with the French President Macron, we send a very important message with the plan for the recovery fund. In Germany, we also sent a very strong message with a multi-billion investment and economic promotion program to show that we want to make our economy as strong as possible and incentivize it so that we can stay in the lead in Europe, and also together with others, and that we can be in the lead in the global economy. There are two valid arguments that will come up in the coming months when it comes to preventing the defense spending from decreasing and to keep it stable. So the one argument is this: questions with regards to the European budget that have a positive impact and that have a good impact on the defense budget, that these are investments that have an added value in the civilian life as well. Two examples. One big topic, by the way, between the EU and NATO is the topic of military mobility. Everything we invest in improving streets, bridges, infrastructure to deploy troops across Europe is something that will also that benefits our security, but also promotes the civilian infrastructure here in Europe. And so we have a very prudent lever, if you will. Everything we use and apply today in order to move our troops within NATO and to better equip our troops within NATO and the EU, to have better weapon systems and defensive systems, helps and supports, at the end of the day, companies that are located in Europe or in the US that are important industry players. And it makes no sense to put together a huge promotion package for the economy where we try to incentivize consumption, but where we and instead pulling back on our investments and pulling back our tenders as the state, thereby reducing activities on the market in the defense industry. And so it makes more sense to pool all of that in NATO, in the EU, with, for example, the European Defense Fund, with the opportunities that military mobility provides, and with the opportunities that we see in our PESCO projects. And then from that, you can generate a leveraging effect where you can use €1 or $1, but have a far bigger impact than if each and every individual state were to invest.
Thank you. That's also a very important part of building resilience, as we have touched upon in the headline for this seminar. One of the lessons learned from the COVID-19, how all of this hangs together, the strong societies, if we have that, and the ability to resist, that also gives us the ability to act more jointly, I would argue, if we are resilient. If we are not, we will get lost and the government will try to fight with what you have. But to be connected, we need to be resilient as well. I would like to move on to the third aspect then. You mentioned threat perception, and I think we met in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. You had a story which I really took in, and that's, you said that when you go to Lithuania, where Germany is heading the enhanced forward presence of NATO battle group, they ask you, can you send more German soldiers? And then you come back to Germany and they say, why don't you bring our German soldiers back home? So that's the difference of a threat perception in two countries that are quite close to each other. And the idea of how to deal with Russia, that has been a big major discussion. We have had France proposing a new architecture for trust and security with Russia, more cooperation, more dialogue, less confrontation. In your view, is there such an opportunity now, or where are we when it comes to having relations with Russia?
Well, I can only agree with you. The question as to how we perceive Russia and how we evaluate Russia's behavior is a decisive question. And it is also a huge challenge in Europe and also within NATO. There is very much a difference if you live in Germany as a German citizen, having being in the very lucky situation of a luxurious situation of being surrounded by friends, or whether you are a country that shares a border with Russia. Or if you're a country like the Northern European or the Baltic or the Eastern European states that on a daily basis see violations by Russia. It is a difference if you see that your airspace is violated, as we see in air policing every day. And it does make a difference whether there is a large number of Russian vessels and submarines that you see every day in your territorial waters, or it does really make a difference if you have to deal with hacker attacks or disinformation campaigns. For example, the German Bundestag, the parliament, was hacked a few years ago. And for example, it also is a big topic of seeing killings that happen if somebody sends out a killer to neutralize somebody. So for our council presidency, it is our first and most important goal to work on the strategic compass, and the first and most important step towards a common strategic understanding is that we have a coordinated and concerted idea of the threat perception emanating from Russia. And Russia is an important partner, it's an important neighbor. The people are wonderful in Russia, but we do see an aggressive, assertive policy coming from the Russian leadership. What we're experiencing is that the former historic sphere of influence of Russia is supposed to be secured again. Russia did that in eastern Ukraine, in Crimea, and Russia has no respect for the right to self-determination of other countries. It's the first time since the Second World War that borders have been changed with force. And that is in stark contrast to that common value basis that we're a member of and that we share. And we need to be very clear about that. I know that all this time there have been attempts to restart and reset the relations with Russia. I do believe that Russia needs to understand very clearly that we in Europe and in NATO are strong, that we follow through with what we do, and that we are willing to tackle the threat that Russia poses. And this is why the concept of deterrence is so up to date. It is as much on vogue as it was 20, 30 years ago. And this is why we still need it. And at the same time, we want Russia to come back to the negotiating table so that we can have valid disarmament treaties again, for example.
We have, thank you. We have seen how Germany has engaged much more in the Baltic Sea region, in Northern Europe in these past years, naturally, given the background you just described. Is Germany willing to engage even more in defense and deterrence in this region ahead?
It is a task that definitely is going to be demanded from us and that awaits us. Let's just look at the situation in the high north. There, we see that we face the same challenges. There are geopolitical rivalries between Russia and China. We do face the same global security questions that you just outlined earlier. What we've seen in recent weeks, for example, a pandemic, the impact of climate change, there are threats emanating from the cyber and information space. And so we do have common interests, and this is why we do want to cooperate more closely. For me, what's important is the cooperation in the maritime area. We did exercises together. This year, we had a major exercise planned that had to be canceled due to Corona, unfortunately, but we do hope that we can do this exercise next year. And so there are many cooperation projects that we're talking about between Germany and Norway, for example. So that means we do have close cooperation that is ongoing. And the first German conference between Germany and the Northern European states served exactly that purpose, to strengthen and intensify that cooperation.
In connection to this, I would like just to raise another issue that I think is perhaps significant for the smaller nations in the north, where we have resilience built in a mobilization of the whole society, and that means both men and women. So on the other hand, women are very much underrepresented in the defense and security sector. Now here you and I are both women, but that is not the normal sight. I think it's roughly 10% of the armed forces among the NATO allies are women and so on. So how do you see the engagement of women in security and the defense in order to build this kind of stronger resilient societies and the democracy, open societies also that you described earlier?
Women are absolutely indispensable in all areas of society. There's a beautiful sentence by Rita Süssmuth who said, "You can't do anything, you can't have a state without women, and you can't have security policy without women either." And this is why the military has to be a sphere that is obviously open to women as well. We've only opened all areas of our military to women quite late. So we are still catching up, if you will. So in our different services, we still have a low percentage of women. But especially when it comes to the issue of international missions and operations, for example, UN missions as well, in countries where very often there's been wars waged on the population, there's been terrorism, and all these often target women in particularly. Just think of the horrible terrorist attack in Afghanistan, where an Opgen hospital was attacked and women and their babies were targeted and killed. If we consider all that, then it is important that in peacekeeping missions we have a high share of women, because women need to see themselves represented so they can trust the security forces, because we've seen, unfortunately, in the past in UN missions that the troops themselves committed crimes too. So I am absolutely convinced that the better mix we have of men and women, the better it will be for the mission and, of course, for the people, the women on the ground who we are there to protect.
Thank you. I think that this is also an important part of, as you say, our open society, our democratic society, our values. In Munich, you were very strong in your speech at the security conference this year, because you said that we are not neutral, we are not in the middle, we are the West. And I thought that was very inspiring in that sense. We have seen also now during the COVID-19 crisis how Europe is waking up to a world where China is also much more present, much more assertive, and the confrontation between the US and China has also been increasing. China is also more active in the Arctic, as you mentioned, the high north. And at the same time, we have this bringing us back to the transatlantic alliance. I want to end there before I let the questions in. But, do you foresee that the EU and the US can agree on a common response on China, given this perspective? And can this be an agenda ahead for the transatlantic alliance?
China is, for us, and that means for the US, but also for us Europeans, China is a systemic challenge. It is a system that is about to prove that you can be economically strong without respecting the basic principles of individual liberties, of democratic values, of civil rights. the way we respect them in Europe and in the United States. So we've had this idea for a long time that China cares mostly about economic influence. But if we look at the recent past, at the last few months, then I think this time proves us wrong, because we can see that in the Indo-Pacific, China is being very assertive and is gaining more and more clout. So if I talk to my Australian counterpart, then I can see that Australia is very concerned about China. They're as concerned about China than the northern states are about Russia. But the truth is also that we live in a globalized, multinational, multilateral world with economic ties. So that means that we must not engage in trade wars that will ruin us all. And at the same time, we must stand up for our values. We can only do that if we do it together as a Western community that includes Europe, the United States, Canada, the like-minded states. We share common values. Of course, we may not have the same interests on every single topic, but we always share the same values. Maybe, we might quarrel sometimes, but let's not forget that we share the values. This is a big task for us, a task for our leadership, and it is ahead of us for now.
Thank you so much. I think we could have gone on with this conversation for even much longer, but time is running out, and I would like to let a few questions in. There are plenty of questions. We will not be able to address all of them. Unfortunately, we will have to come back to this, but I would like to give the floor, and we will have on camera here Lyndon Blue, who is co-owner and vice chairman of General Atomics, and also on the Atlantic Council board director. Please, Lyndon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam Minister, you did mention how measuring defense spending by percentage of gross national product is an imperfect way of measuring effectiveness. So my question is, do you as Defense Minister, can you say something about your priorities for specific capability, for improving or creating specific capability that would fill gaps in the NATO mission? Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Minister?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. We committed certain capabilities to NATO, and of course, its capabilities according to our role within this alliance. We are a hub when it comes to deploying on operations, quick deployment. We reported troops to do that when we are working on that. Currently, in Germany, we are seeing a discussion about replacing our Tornado aircraft fleet, and we want to replace all roles of our Tornado fleets. That means we have an air combat capability, but also a capability of nuclear sharing and electronic warfare. And we need to have appropriate new aircraft for that. What concerns all of us is the questions of how we respond to the challenges, the threats of the future. Think of new weapon systems, hypersonic autonomous systems. how are we going to address this new threat from the air? How can we defend against that? So we are currently working on a future combat air system and air defense system. Together with France and Spain, we are developing the combat aircraft of the future, so to speak, future combat air system, and also the future main ground combat system. So we've committed to that and we're working on it very hard. So we will stick to our commitments.
Thank you very much. We are unfortunately running out of time. We have so many excellent questions from this very distinguished audience also that I'm very sorry for that. But I would just like to say there are two quick questions I would like to add then. Talking about the defense industrial dimension, there is a question from Anders Fröberg, who's head of Germany for Swedish defense industrial company Saab. Adding on to that, is there a way that the EU defense industrial cooperation can strengthen the northern dimension in any way as you see it? And then I would like to ask from Justina Gotkowska, senior researcher at the Center for Eastern Studies in Warsaw, following up from NATO defense ministers meeting last week, where this was discussed. What is Germany's answer to the end of the INF treaty and to Russia's growing arsenal of nuclear capable missiles? So please.
So concerning your first question, we have various initiatives. We have the Permanent Structures Cooperation, PESCO, and we are currently trying to have fair rules for third state participation and also armaments companies from third states. I think that is absolutely essential. Finland has offered a good proposal for compromise, and during our council presidency, we will try to implement it so we can get third states on board in PESCO projects. In addition to that, and I've mentioned it, there's good cooperation with Norway, for example, on submarines. And I believe that the northern states have some very specific capabilities that are useful and that we should use within NATO. The question of our response to Russia, well, when it comes to the INF, it is important to note that it was very, very good that the entire NATO, with no exception, said that Russia violated the INF, and this is why it was right for the US to end the INF, because it was an act of aggression. So we made very clear that we will not answer any provocation with a counter-provocation, but we want to give prudent and measured responses. And this is why it was important that, on the issue of where we exercise, how we demonstrate our abilities, that was important for us at first. And now we go one step further. The threat of Russia is not only seen in terms of a nuclear threat, but we always also look at the huge conventional armament happening in Russia. That is an analysis we're doing right now. And based on that analysis, we have to find common responses in NATO, not only with regard to our nuclear strategy, but also with regard to how we respond to new conventional Russian systems. And that is the discussion we're going to have in the coming month. But right now we have to conclude the analysis first.
Thank you so much. as I said, I would love to continue the conversation, but it is time for us to round this up. It's been an honor, Madam Minister, and I will leave the floor to Ben Haddad, the Director for the Future Europe Initiative, for some concluding remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning in the United States. Good afternoon in Europe. I'm Ben Haddad. I'm the Director of the Future Europe Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. Madam Minister, it was such an honor to have you with us this morning for this AC front page conversation. You know the Atlantic Council. We're founded with this simple mission that America is stronger with its allies. We face today an unprecedented health crisis, an economic crisis, and our societies on both sides of the Atlantic are reckoning with issues of race, identity, and discrimination. In such a context, it would be easy to look inward, but none of this can be tackled alone. And this is why we at the Atlantic Council, we've gone on offense, making the case for cooperation to shape the world post-COVID and providing a platform to global leaders. Madam Minister, we've heard you today talk about the need to defend our common interests and values, to deal with the Russian threat, the challenge from China, and tackle global issues such as climate change. You've reminded us that US presence in Europe is about collective security and American security. You've made a strong case for unity within NATO, but also for the European Union to take on more responsibility, more risk to defend its own security and interest. The alliance will be stronger with a stronger Europe. And we want to thank you for your leadership on this front, on these issues. And of course, you can count on the Atlantic Council to continue to defend this common agenda with you. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us and wish you a very good rest of the day. And we look forward to seeing all of you for the next Atlantic Council front page conversation. Thank you very much.
Vielen herzlichen Dank. Es war
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting discussion.